So, short video on how to make a wholemeal 5-seeded loaf using a Panasonic bread making machine. A couple of things. First of all, I tend to use the rye paddle because I find it comes out of the bread better at the end of the loaf. You want to make sure it's right in the bottom of the tin, otherwise it doesn't come out so well at the end of the loaf. So my method has a few subtle variations from the recipe in the book. So 1.5 teaspoons of sugar goes in first, then a slightly rounded teaspoon of yeast, then a teaspoon of salt, and then what isn't in the recipe book, but which used to be in one of the first recipes I used with the Panasonic machine when I first bought the machine out, is 1/4 teaspoon of Dove's Farm vitamin C, specially made for bread making machines. It has a dramatic effect on the way the yeast works and the quality of the final bread. It really is worth using that. So there's the ingredients all in the bottom of the pan. They need to go underneath the flour. So I'm going to use a rye spelt wholemeal recipe. I'm going to put 25 grams of spelt. And 25 grams of rye. And then top it up to the 500 mark, 500 grams that is, with Dove's Farm organic strong bread flour. As you can see, I'm using a zeroing or tare scale, and I'm just zeroing it after every addition. So zero it. And then this is quite an important part. You shake it so you get it level, and then just tap it down on your hand to seal the flour around the edges of the pan. That way when you put the water in, it doesn't flow down to the yeast. So I'm going to put 30 grams of locally grown rapeseed oil in, having zeroed it. Now that's 30 grams. And the beauty of zeroing it each time is you only have one thing to wash up, which is the bread pan, and you don't really need to wash that up each time. So I'm putting in 200 mils of water, and then another 220, so that's 420 altogether. You put it in quite carefully so that it doesn't disturb the flour. The effect of that is that the water sits on top of the flour and doesn't go down to the yeast until the actual machine starts turning in about 5 or 6 hours. That way the yeast works exactly how it's meant to, and it's totally consistent each time. If you do mix it up beforehand or put the flour on top of the water, the whole lot can mix up prematurely and it can have very unpredictable results. So although some people say do it that way, this is definitely the way to do it. So there it is. You can see the water just sitting happily on top of the flour. It's not going to go anywhere. It might go down a tiny bit into the flour, but it definitely won't reach the yeast at the bottom. And it'll just sit there until the whole thing is ready to start going at whatever time you set on the clock. So I'm going to put the water and flour mix into the bread making machine. Just goes in at a slight angle and you click it round so it locks in. Shut the thing, and then I tend to prefer to start it now, because if you don't, it's very easy to forget and actually end up with an uncooked loaf in the morning. So I'll just set the that thing and set the start button, and then I'll do the seeds. So that's giving it an offset of 8 hours and 10 minutes, so it'll be ready at 6:30 in the morning. So I'm going to take out the nut and seed dispenser, because that just comes out, and I'm going to stick that on my scales and zero it. So I'm going to put 60 grams of seeds in. I generally put the sunflower seeds, which these are in first. I'm going to put 20 grams of those in, because there are actually a couple of holes on either side, and if you put the fine seeds in first, they just trickle through those holes. So if you put those in first, they tend to stop them going down. Then I put 10 grams of pumpkin seeds, or thereabouts, 10 grams of sesame seeds, and 10 grams of flax seeds, which although look quite shiny and hard, they become quite nice and soft when they're cooked. And then I'm going to put 10 grams of blue pumpkin seed, poppy seeds in rather. So that's 50 grams, 60 grams rather, of seeds. You have to be very careful when you put them in, because there's a little button there which the mechanism presses when it drops the seeds in. If you pick it up like that and press that button, the seeds will go all over the floor, as has happened to me. So you have to hold it very carefully like that, and just very carefully slip it in, press down gently on each end, and there it is. In a little over 8 hours, we'll have a very nice loaf that will be well risen, lovely soft texture, and incredibly nutritious. And I find that I've got various different flours there. I've got some buckwheat flour, I've got einkorn flour, and I've got Khorasan flour. These are weird Khorasan is an ancient Egyptian flour, and einkorn is one of the earliest cultivated flours. They're all made by Dove's Farm, all organic. And I find that you can put about 50 grams of any of those in, plus you can even put millet flakes in. As long as you don't put too much of any of these things in, it rises just as well as it would normally. And it just creates a slightly different, interesting texture and interesting taste. So that's it. Oh, one last thing I forgot to say is that you want to try and time it so that the loaf is cooked just a few minutes before you're going to get up and take it out, because if you leave, although it's got a keep warm function, if you leave it in the tin for too long once it's cooked, it does tend to adversely affect the crust. So I find it's best to set the thing so it's going to finish, and set my alarm clock so that it finishes just a few minutes before that. I just come down and turn it out and leave it to cool.